am Lillian Yates, 32 years old. And in my family's world, I'm just a useless intern working in a windowless basement. But they don't know that that basement is where I control weapons worth billions of dollars. The worst moment of my life wasn't on the battlefield, but at the flashy Virginia Officers Club. My Uncle Robert, the man who always considered me the family failure, stood there, laughing and introducing me to my future subordinate as if I were a waitress. He smirked, patted my shoulder, and said, "Save this girl, Davies, she needs a real job." He thought he was doing a favor. He had no idea that in just 30 seconds, the man he was trying to impress would stand at attention, break out in a cold sweat, and greet me with a title my uncle could never dream of. Have you ever been trampled on by your own flesh and blood in front of a crowd? Comment: Justice. If you are ready to see the arrogant pay the price, don't forget to subscribe, because this story is for anyone who has ever been underestimated. To understand why that moment at the club felt like oxygen entering a dying lung, you have to go back 3 weeks, to a Sunday dinner table that felt more like a courtroom. The drive to my parents' house in Northern Virginia always feels like a physical assault. It starts the moment I merge onto I-95. The traffic south of D.C. is its own special kind of purgatory, brake lights stretching out like a river of red magma. But that wasn't what was making my stomach twist into knots. It was the anticipation. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a simple navy blouse and slacks. Clean, professional. Civilians would call it business casual. My mother calls it unfortunate. I knew exactly what she would say the moment I walked through the door. She would ask why I couldn't wear something brighter, something softer, something that didn't make me look so rigid. By the time I pulled into the driveway, past the manicured lawn that my father obsesses over, my hands were already sweating on the steering wheel. I took a deep breath, inhaling the recycled air of my sedan, trying to lock away Phoenix 1, the captain who coordinates drone strikes, and pull on the mask of Lily, the disappointing daughter. I opened the front door, and the smell hit me instantly. Roast beef. It's the quintessential American Sunday smell, isn't it? Slow-roasted beef, heavy gravy, and the sharp tannic scent of expensive red wine breathing in crystal decanters. For most people, that smell means home. For me, it smells like judgment. "Lily, you made it!" my mother called out from the kitchen, her voice tight. "We were just about to sit down. Robert is already holding court." Of course he was. Uncle Robert sat at the head of the table, even though it was my father's house. He was 62, a retired colonel who had never seen actual combat but spoke as if he'd won the Cold War single-handedly. He was wearing a polo shirt that cost more than my car payment, and he was swirling a glass of 12-year-old scotch, the ice cubes clinking against the glass like a metronome ticking down the seconds until he lost his temper. "There she is," Robert boomed, his face already flushed with liquor. "The working girl. Finally dragged yourself away from the paper stacks?" "Hello, Uncle Robert," I said, taking my seat. I reached for the linen napkin, unfolding it across my lap, focusing on the fabric texture just to keep my hands from shaking. "We were just talking about the new contract," Robert continued, not waiting for a response. He looked around the table, making sure he had everyone's eyes. My father, John, was busy cutting his meat, avoiding eye contact. He always made himself small when Robert was in the room. "Desert Hammer," Robert announced, letting the words roll off his tongue like he was tasting the steak. "Big consulting gig. I'm heading up the advisory board. The Pentagon is finally realizing they need old hands on the wheel, not these computer geeks they're hiring straight out of college." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Desert Hammer. I knew Desert Hammer. I knew it because I had spent the last 48 hours rewriting the engagement protocols for it. I knew it because the computer geeks he was mocking were actually intelligence officers working 18-hour shifts to ensure men like Robert didn't get soldiers killed with outdated strategies. "That sounds important," I said quietly, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. Robert laughed. It was a wet, dismissive sound. "It is important, Lily. It's strategy. High-level stuff. Not that you'd know much about that. How is what do you call it, data entry? Are you still filing reports in that basement?" The air in the room seemed to vanish. It's not data entry, Uncle Robert, I said. I tried to keep my voice even, but the frustration was leaking out. I'm in Intel. We're actually working on the support packages for operations like… Oh, stop, my father cut in. He didn't look up. He just stabbed a potato with his fork. Don't bore your uncle, Lily. We know you work in an office. There's no need to dress it up. I'm an officer, Dad, I said, a little louder this time. I'm an active duty captain. You're support staff, honey, my mother chimed in, pouring more wine into Robert's glass. She offered me a pitying smile. And there's no shame in that. At least you have benefits. Dental is so expensive these days. You know, your cousin Sarah just made branch manager at Wells Fargo. Now that is a career. She has her own office with a view of the park. A branch manager. I command assets that can level a city block from 4,000 miles away. And my mother is impressed that my cousin has a window overlooking a parking lot. I looked at them. I looked at my father, shrinking into his chair. I looked at my mother, desperate to keep the peace. And I looked at Robert, who was grinning like a shark that had just smelled blood. Don't worry about it, Martha, Robert said, waving his hand magnanimously. Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues. The military is changing. They need people to make the coffee and file the paperwork. He leaned forward, his Scotch breath drifting across the table. Tell you what, Lily. Since I'm consulting on Desert Hammer, I'll be seeing Colonel Davies next week. He's running the ground ops. I'll put in a good word for you. Pull some strings. He paused for effect, waiting for my gratitude. Maybe I can get him to move you out of that basement. Get you a receptionist gig in his outer office. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Meet some nice young officers? My hand tightened around the heavy silver fork. I squeezed it so hard my knuckles turned white, the metal biting into my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that Colonel Davies reported to me on the intelligence channel. I wanted to flip the table and shatter the illusion of this perfect, successful family. But I didn't. I looked down at the silver fork, gleaming under the chandelier. It was heavy, cold, and polished, just like the lie we were all living. Thank you, Uncle Robert, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That's a good girl, he said, and went back to his steak. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea what was coming. The silence at the dinner table stretched out, heavy and suffocating. My hand was still gripping that cold silver fork, my knuckles white against the polished metal. That sensation, the biting cold of hard metal against my skin, didn't keep me grounded in my parents' dining room. Instead, it pulled me backward. It dragged me away from the smell of roast beef and scotch, transporting me 8 years into the past and 2,000 miles west, to a stadium in Colorado Springs where the air was thin and the sky was a piercing, endless blue. It was graduation day at the United States Air Force Academy. If you aren't military, you might not understand what that day means. It isn't just a cap and gown ceremony. It is the culmination of 4 years of hell. 4 years of breaking yourself down and rebuilding yourself into something harder, sharper. It is the hat toss. It is the roar of the thunderbird screaming overhead, shaking the concrete beneath your feet. I remember standing on the field at Falcon Stadium, surrounded by a sea of cadets in dress uniform. The energy was electric. Everywhere I looked, I saw families losing their minds with pride. I saw fathers crying openly, mothers holding up homemade signs that said, "We love you, Lieutenant." I saw cadets being engulfed in bear hugs, their new gold bars glinting in the sun. And then there was my family. My parents had flown in the night before. They were sitting in the VIP section, of course, because my father had donated to the alumni fund. I remember scanning the crowd, desperate to lock eyes with them, to share that split second of, I did it. When I finally found them, my father was checking his watch. My mother was adjusting her hat, looking bothered by the heat. After the ceremony, while my friends were heading to rowdy backyard BBQs with kegs and music, my parents took me to a quiet, white tablecloth steakhouse downtown. There were no balloons, no toasts. "We can't stay long, Lillian," my father said, cutting into his filet mignon. "I have a breakfast meeting with a developer in Denver tomorrow morning. We need to be on the road by 8. "But Dad," I said, my voice sounding small even to my own ears. "I thought you guys would stay for the commissioning parties. The whole squadron is going." "We've seen you, haven't we?" my mother said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "You looked very orderly out there." But really, all that marching gave me a headache. Besides, we took a picture. It's already on Facebook. That was it. A photo op. I was a trophy to be displayed on social media to prove they were successful parents. But in reality, I was eating a $70 steak in silence, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. But the real blow, the one that left the scar I still carry, didn't come from my parents. It came from Uncle Robert. He hadn't bothered to fly out. "Too busy consulting," he'd said. Instead, a week later, a package arrived at my first duty station. I remember the excitement I felt holding that heavy envelope. I thought, finally. He's a retired colonel. He understands. He knows what it takes to earn these bars. I tore it open. Inside wasn't a commemorative plaque. It wasn't a sword. It wasn't even a handwritten letter of advice from one officer to another. It was a generic Hallmark greeting card. On the front, it had a picture of a cartoon bear holding a briefcase. I opened it. In Robert's sprawling, jagged handwriting, he had written 3 words. "Good luck, intern." And taped below it was a $50 gift card to Starbucks. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Intern. I was a commissioned second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. I had survived survival training, academic rigors, and physical conditioning that would break most men half my age. I had sworn an oath to defend the Constitution. To him, I was just a girl playing dress-up. I was someone who would fetch coffee until I found a husband and quit. That card sat on my desk for months. I looked at it every single day. It became a reminder of every conversation I'd ever had with him. I remembered a Thanksgiving when I was 16, telling him I wanted to be a pilot. He had laughed, his face flushed with wine, just like it was tonight. "Lily, sweetheart," he had said, leaning back in his chair. "War is a nasty business. It's for men who can kick down doors and sleep in the mud. Women in the service, well, they're great for morale. Or typing. You'd make a great nurse. Or maybe a secretary for a general. Keep things organized." He constantly compared me to a ghost, my older brother, who died in a car accident when I was 10. In Robert's revisionist history, my brother would have been a Navy SEAL, a Ranger, a hero. I was just the consolation prize, the plan B that didn't quite work out. I realized then, standing in my empty apartment holding that insulting card, that I would never win. I could become a general, and to Robert, I would just be a diversity hire. I could save the world, and my parents would only care if it messed up their dinner reservations. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was something harder, like steel tempering in fire. If they wanted to see me as invisible, fine, I would disappear. I wouldn't try to be the kick-down-the-door soldier Robert worshipped. I wouldn't be the loud, chest-thumping hero. I would go where they couldn't follow. I chose intelligence. I chose the SIF. I chose the dark rooms and the satellite feeds. I chose a world where I didn't need to be physically imposing to kill a target. I just needed to be smarter, faster, and colder than everyone else. I decided that while men like Robert were busy recounting their glory days at the officers' club, I would be in the shadows, moving pieces on a chessboard they didn't even know existed. My grip on the silver fork loosened, the blood returning to my white knuckles. The flashback faded, leaving me back at the dinner table, smelling the roast beef and Robert's scotch. I looked up at him. He was still smiling, waiting for me to thank him again for his offer to get me a receptionist gig. They thought I was the black sheep, the outcast, the weak link. They didn't know that black sheep are the ones who learn to survive in the dark, and in the dark, you learn to see things others miss. Have you ever had a moment where your greatest achievement was treated like a joke by the people who were supposed to support you? Have you ever felt like the black sheep just because you didn't fit their mold? If you're standing with me, if you're ready to see the underdog bite back, hit that like button and comment, "I am worthy," below. Let them know we aren't invisible. Robert took another sip of his drink, oblivious. "So," he said, smacking his lips, "Davies is a stickler for protocol. Don't embarrass me, Lily." I forced a smile. It was thin and sharp. I wouldn't dream of it, Uncle Robert. Because I wasn't going to embarrass him. I was going to destroy him, and I was going to do it from the place he feared most, the shadows I now called home. The memory of the silver fork digging into my palm faded, replaced by the cool matte plastic of a biometric security badge. My Uncle Robert calls my workplace the basement. My mother calls it the office. Both of them picture a damp, dusty storage room filled with filing cabinets and a flickering fluorescent bulb. They imagine me down there, hunched over stacks of paper, stapling reports for men who do the real work. The reality would terrify them. I stood in front of the reinforced steel door of the CCF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. To the civilian world, this is a black hole. No cell phones, no smartwatches, no outside signals. Once that heavy door seals behind you with a pressurized hiss, you are gone. You don't exist. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. A green light flashed, followed by the heavy mechanical thunk of the magnetic locks disengaging. I stepped inside and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The air here was always exactly 65 degrees, frigid enough to keep the banks of servers from overheating, cold enough to keep the operators awake during 18-hour shifts. The smell wasn't roast beef and expensive cologne, it was ozone, stale coffee, and the sharp metallic scent of high-voltage electronics. This was my kingdom. I walked past the rows of analysts, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of quadruple monitor setups. The room hummed, a low, constant vibration of cooling fans that sounded like a hive of angry bees. "Captain on deck," a master sergeant murmured as I passed his station. He didn't salute. We don't do that in the SIF during ops. But he shifted in his chair, straightening his spine. "As you were, Sergeant," I said, my voice dropping an octave. In this room, I wasn't Lily, the niece who needed a receptionist job. I was Phoenix 1. I slid into my command chair at the center of the nest, a raised platform surrounded by screens displaying live feeds from assets hovering 40,000 feet above the Middle East. "Status report," I said, pulling on my headset. "We have eyes on the target package for Desert Hammer," the communications officer replied instantly. "Predator feeds are live. SIGINT is picking up increased chatter in Sector 4. The ground team is 5 minutes out." I looked at the main screen. It wasn't a video game. It was a high-resolution thermal feed of a dusty compound halfway around the world. White silhouettes moved against the gray background. People. Living, breathing people whose lives depended on the calls I made in the next 10 minutes. This was the job Robert mocked. This was the data entry. "Phoenix 1, this is Hammer Lead," a voice crackled in my ear. It was a full-bird colonel on the ground, a man with 20 years of infantry experience. "We are seeing movement on the ridge, requesting permission to engage." I scanned the monitors. My eyes darted from the thermal feed to the signal's intelligence overlay. I saw something the colonel couldn't. "Negative, Hammer Lead," I said, my voice calm, flat, and absolute. "Hold your fire. I repeat, hold your fire." "Phoenix, I have hostiles in the open," the colonel barked, the stress evident in his voice. "I am making the call to engage." "Colonel," I cut him off. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. "Check your overlay. Look at the heat signatures on the secondary ridge. Those aren't spotters. They're non-combatants herding livestock. If you engage the primary target now, the crossfire will wipe them out. You will have a mass casualty event on your hands, and CNN will have the footage by breakfast. Do you copy?" There was a silence on the line, a heavy, static-filled pause. In the dining room at my parents' house, I couldn't even finish a sentence about my day without being interrupted. But here, a colonel commanding a battalion paused because I told him to. "Copy that, Phoenix," the colonel's voice came back, stripped of its arrogance. "We are standing down, rerouting approach." "Good copy, Hammer Lead. We'll guide you in through the valley. Phoenix out." I exhaled, the adrenaline spiking through my veins like a shot of espresso. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. My hands weren't shaking now. They were steady. I looked at the small laminated card I'd taped to the bottom corner of my center monitor. It wasn't a picture of a cat or a family photo. It was a quote from Theodore Roosevelt, the man in the arena. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. I touched the edge of the card. Robert loved to quote this speech. He loved to talk about the dust and sweat, but he didn't understand that the arena had changed. The arena wasn't just mud and trenches anymore. The arena was this room. It was the mental endurance to make life or death decisions while staring at pixels, knowing that a single mistake meant a flag-draped coffin coming home to Dover Air Force Base. Robert and his friends at the Officers' Club thought courage was loud. They thought it was drinking scotch and telling war stories. They didn't know the quiet, crushing weight of holding a man's life in your hands from 4,000 miles away. "Shift change in 10, ma'am," the sergeant whispered. "Roger that." I began the shutdown protocol, logging the incident report. As the screens flickered and the feeds transferred to the night crew, I pulled up one last document. It was the master organizational chart for Operation Desert Hammer, the consulting contract Robert was so proud of. I zoomed in. There, at the very top of the operational pyramid, under the Intelligence Oversight node, was a box labeled CPT-L. Yaz Yates, Mission Controller. From my box, lines of authority cascaded down like a waterfall, touching every unit, every asset, every decision. I scrolled down, and down, and down. Way at the bottom, in a dotted line box attached to the Civilian Advisory Appendix, a box that had no command authority, no operational clearance, and essentially no point, was the name, Calvary C. Rhett R. Rhett. He was a garnish, a decoration. I was the chef. He was going to walk into that officers' club thinking he owned the place, thinking he could pull strings for me. He didn't realize that the strings he thought he was pulling were actually attached to my fingers. I closed the file, the screen fading to black. In the reflection of the monitor, I saw my own face. Pale from the lack of sun, tired eyes, no makeup. My mother would say I looked washed out. But I didn't see a basement intern. I saw a predator lying in wait. They laugh at me because I'm different, because I don't fit their mold of a soldier. But in the dark, I laugh at them because they are all the same. I stood up, grabbed the file for Desert Hammer, and walked toward the heavy steel door. It was time to step out of the kingdom and back into the masquerade. It was time to go meet General Thorne, and it was time to set the trap. I left the sterile, pressurized atmosphere of the SCIF and took the elevator up to the 5th floor. The hallway leading to General Thorne's office felt different from the rest of the building. The linoleum floors were replaced by industrial carpet that dampened the sound of footsteps. The air smelled less like ozone and more like old paper, lemon furniture polish, and the faint, comforting aroma of brewing coffee. I knocked on the heavy oak door, one of the few real wood doors in a building made of steel and concrete. "Enter," a deep voice rumbled from inside. I pushed the door open. Major General Marcus Thorne was sitting behind a desk that looked like it had survived 3 wars. At 65, Thorne was a mountain of a man. He was African American, with close-cropped gray hair and a face etched with the kind of deep lines that come from making hard decisions for 40 years. He didn't look up immediately. He was signing a stack of requisition forms with a fountain pen, his movements precise and deliberate. "Captain Yates," he said, capping the pen with a sharp click. He looked up, and his eyes, usually hard as flint, softened around the edges. Or should I say, the woman who just saved my ground team from a PR nightmare. I stood at attention, clutching the Desert Hammer file against my chest. "Just doing the job, General." "At ease, Lily," he said, waving a hand toward the leather chair opposite his desk. "Sit down. You look like you haven't slept since Tuesday." I sat, the leather sighing under me. It was a familiar sound. I had spent more hours in this chair debriefing operations than I had spent at my own kitchen table. Thorne stood up and walked over to the small table in the corner where a battered commercial coffee machine sat. It wasn't an espresso machine. It wasn't fancy. It brewed sludge that tasted like burnt nuts and jet fuel. He poured a cup into a styrofoam container, added 2 packets of sugar, and set it down in front of me. "Drink," he ordered. It wasn't a suggestion. I took the cup. The heat seeped through the white foam, warming my cold fingers. I took a sip. It was terrible, and it was the best thing I had tasted all week. At my parents' house, wine was poured from crystal decanters worth more than my first car. But it was served with conditions. It was served with judgment. Here, this 50-cent cup of vending machine coffee was served with something my father had never given me: respect. I heard the audio logs from The Intercept, Thorne said, leaning back against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. You made a tough call holding back that strike. Most officers would have let the colonel take the shot. The colonel was looking at the target, I said, tracing the rim of the cup. I was looking at the bigger picture. Dead civilians don't help the mission, sir. Thorne nodded slowly. That's why you're my scalpel, Lily. Other people use sledgehammers. You cut clean. My scalpel. He didn't call me honey. He didn't call me intern. He called me a surgical instrument. Dangerous, precise, essential. Thank you, sir, I said, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I swallowed it down with more coffee. Now, Thorne said, his tone shifting from fatherly to commanding. Go get some actual food before you pass out in my office. Mike and Sarah are in the break room. I think they ordered enough grease to stop a tank. I smiled. Yes, sir. I walked down the hall to the team break room. Before I even opened the door, I heard laughter. Mike, a signals analyst from Jersey with a mouth that ran faster than his brain, was sitting on a table, waving a French fry like a baton. Sarah, my second in command, was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Yo, the Phoenix has landed, Mike shouted as I walked in. He tossed a paper bag at me. Catch, we got you the spicy chicken sandwich, extra pickles, just how you like it. I caught the bag, the grease staining the bottom. You guys started without me? We were starving, boss, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. Mike was about to eat the napkins. Sit. Eat. I sat down between them, unwrapping the foil. The smell of fried chicken and Cajun spices filled the small room. We ate and we talked. We didn't talk about the mission. We didn't talk about the life and death calls we had just made. We talked about Mike's disastrous date the night before. We argued about whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie. We complained about the DC traffic. In that moment, surrounded by crumpled wrappers and plastic cups, I looked at them. Mike, who would stay late just to double-check my code. Sarah, who had driven me to the ER at 3:00 a.m. when I had appendicitis because my parents didn't pick up the phone. This was it. This was the found family. They didn't share my DNA. They didn't care about my pedigree or my uncle's rank. They judged me by one metric only. Was I good at my job? Was I a good person? And apparently, to them, I was. Hey, Mike said, nudging my arm. You okay, Lil? You went quiet. I'm good, I said, taking a bite of the sandwich. Just tired. Well, wake up, Sarah said, checking her watch. Thorne needs that file signed off before the 14-bub briefing. Right. I wiped my hands, grabbed the Desert Hammer file, and headed back to the general's office. Thorne was back behind his desk. He took the file from me and opened it. He pulled out his pen, scanning the personnel roster. Standard team, he muttered. Logistics. Check. Air support. Check. Intel lead. Yates. Good. Then his pen stopped. He frowned. His thick eyebrows knitted together as he stared at the bottom of the page. Robert Rhett. Thorne read the name out loud. The warmth vanished from his voice, replaced by cold steel. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. Your uncle? Yes, sir, I said, my posture stiffening. He's the civilian consultant for the contractor. It's administrative. Thorne closed the file slowly. He didn't sign it immediately. He looked at me, and for a second I saw genuine concern in his eyes. Not the concern of a general for a captain, but the concern of a father seeing his child walking toward a cliff. I know Robert, Thorne said quietly. We served together in the 90s. He's a politician in a uniform, Lily. He likes the shine, but he hates the work. He uncapped his pen again, hovering over the signature line. Listen to me, Phoenix, he said, using my call sign to emphasize the order. Robert is going to try to use you. He's going to try to leverage your position to make himself look important. He's going to treat this operation like a country club mixer. Thorne signed the document with a sharp, aggressive scratch of ink. He closed the folder and slid it across the desk toward me. "Don't let him," Thorne said, his eyes locking onto mine. "This is your operation, not his. Do not let family obligations compromise my mission. Do you understand?" I picked up the file. It felt heavier than before. "Crystal clear, sir." "Good," Thorne said. "Dismissed." I walked out of the office, holding the signed orders. The warmth of the coffee and the laughter in the break room felt distant now. Thorne was right. I had built a sanctuary here, a world where I was respected, where I was safe, and Robert was coming to tear it down. I walked toward the elevators, my grip tightening on the file. I wouldn't let him. This was my family. This was my house, and I would defend it against anyone, even my own blood. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the laughter from the break room. For a few brief minutes, amidst the smell of fried chicken and the banter of my team, I had forgotten. I had forgotten that outside the reinforced walls of the Pentagon, there was a man who viewed my career not as a service to my country, but as a networking opportunity for himself. Peace in the military is a myth. But usually the threat comes from foreign adversaries. It doesn't come from an iPhone vibrating in your pocket. Bzzzt, bzzzt, bzzzt. The sound broke the silence of the hallway like a warning siren. It wasn't a call. It was a notification flood. I pulled my phone out. The screen was lit up with a string of notifications from my personal email app, all linked to the same sender. Call Robert Rhett. Rhett. My stomach tightened. He wasn't supposed to be emailing me during duty hours, and he certainly wasn't supposed to be using my personal email for anything related to work. I unlocked the phone and opened the first message. My jaw actually ached from how hard I clenched my teeth. The subject line was written in all caps, screaming at me from the screen. Urgent, tactical adjustments for Desert Hammer. I stopped walking. I stood there in the middle of the corridor, staring at the phone. He had sent this to my civilian email, but he had CC'd my official unclassified military address. He had just breached protocol before he'd even finished his first cup of coffee. I opened the email. It was formatted like a manifesto. No greeting, no professional courtesy, just blocks of text, typed in a font size that was too large, with random words capitalized for emphasis. "Lily," it began. "I've been reviewing the preliminary briefs for the rollout. I noticed you have the drone surveillance set for a high-altitude holding pattern. Bad move. Back in my day, we needed eyes on the deck. I want you to drop the altitude to 15,000 feet. We need to show these people we mean business. Make it loud. Scare them." I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was professional horror. Back in his day, drones were glorified model airplanes with cameras taped to them. Today, the MQ-9 Reapers I controlled were sophisticated stealth assets. Dropping them to 15,000 feet wouldn't scare the enemy. It would expose a $40 million asset to shoulder-fired missiles. It was suicide. It was stupid, and he was putting it in writing. I was about to hit delete when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. Dad. I stared at the caller ID. My father never called me during the workday. He was terrified of interrupting important business. Unless, of course, the important business was Robert. I slid the bar to answer, stepping into a quiet alcove near the restrooms. "Captain Yates," I answered, keeping my voice clipped. "Lily," my father's voice came through, sounding anxious and thin. "Thank goodness you picked up. Your uncle is trying to reach you. He says he sent you some vital instructions, and you haven't responded." "Dad," I said, rubbing my temple. "I'm at work. I'm in the middle of an operation. Robert cannot be emailing me tactical advice. He's a civilian consultant. He doesn't have the clearance, and frankly, he doesn't know what he's talking about." Now, Lily," my father soothed, using the tone he used when I was a teenager and refused to wear a dress. "Don't be difficult. Robert is just trying to help you. He told us at the club yesterday that he's practically running this show. He said he's letting you handle the paperwork so you can feel involved." Feel involved. The words hit me like a physical slap. I was commanding the entire intelligence apparatus for the sector. I was the one keeping Colonel Davies' men alive. And Robert was telling the entire extended family in Virginia that I was his glorified secretary. He told Aunt Martha that you're just organizing his files. My father continued, oblivious to the silence on my end. He's doing this for you, honey. He wants you to look good for Colonel Davies. Just listen to him, okay? Reply to his email. Say, thank you, Uncle Robert. It won't kill you to be polite. I have to go, Dad, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. Lily, promise me you won't make a scene. We have a reputation. I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I couldn't. But I pressed the end call button with enough force to crack the screen. I took a deep breath, trying to regain the icy composure of Phoenix 1. Ignore him, I told myself. He's just noise. Focus on the mission. But the noise wasn't done. Ping. Another email. This one was flagged high importance. I opened it, dread pooling in my stomach. Subject: schedule change, mandatory. Lily, tell Davies I need to move the Friday strategy briefing to Aero 800. I booked a tea time at the Army-Navy Country Club for 1100. I want to get Davies out on the back nine. That's where the real deals are made, sweetheart, not in your dark little room. Make it happen. Uncle Bob. I stared at the screen until the pixels started to blur. He wanted to move a critical combat strategy briefing, a briefing where we would determine the engagement zones for 3,000 soldiers, because he wanted to play golf. He wanted to turn a warzone planning session into a schmooze fest. This wasn't just annoying anymore. This wasn't just a family issue. This was dangerous. Robert viewed the military as a country club. He viewed rank as a social status. He viewed war as a backdrop for his ego. And he viewed me as the help hired to arrange the party favors. If I moved that briefing, Colonel Davies would lose critical prep time. If I lowered those drones, we would lose assets. Robert wasn't just an embarrassment, he was a liability. He was a virus in the system, and if I didn't quarantine him, he was going to get people killed. I looked at the phone in my hand. It felt heavy, like a grenade with the pin pulled. For 32 years, I had been the good niece. I had sat at the kids' table. I had smiled when they insulted me. I had eaten the roast beef and swallowed the insults like bad medicine. But I wasn't at the dinner table anymore. I was in the Pentagon. This was my ground. This was my war. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't call my father back to apologize. I put the phone in my pocket. I straightened my uniform shirt, checking the alignment of my buttons. I reached up and smoothed back a stray hair, securing it tightly. My patience had evaporated. The sadness I had felt about being the black sheep was gone, burned away by a white-hot clarity. I turned on my heel, my boots striking the linoleum floor with a sharp, rhythmic cadence. I wasn't walking back to the break room. I wasn't walking back to the SIF. I was walking straight back to General Thorne's office. Robert wanted to play games? Fine. But he forgot one thing. In the game of war, you don't send a golfer to fight a phoenix. I marched down the hallway, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care if I made a scene. I was going to draw a line in the sand, and I dared him to cross it. The hallway leading to General Thorne's office seemed longer than usual, but my steps didn't falter. In the past, walking toward a confrontation with a superior officer or a family member would have made my hands shake. I would have spent the entire walk rehearsing apologies, trying to find a way to soften the blow, to be the good girl who didn't cause trouble. But Phoenix 1 doesn't apologize for protecting her perimeter. I didn't knock tentatively this time. I rapped on the heavy oak door with 3 sharp, authoritative strikes. Enter, Thorne's voice boomed. I stepped inside. The general was standing by the window, looking out at the Potomac River. He turned as I entered, and his eyebrows raised slightly. He must have seen the change in my posture, the way my shoulders were squared, the way my jaw was set. I wasn't carrying a cup of coffee this time. I was carrying a printout of Robert's emails. Captain, Thorne said, sensing the shift. What do you have? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I walked straight to his desk and placed the papers down, smoothing them flat with a deliberate hand. Sir, I am filing a formal report regarding a breach of operational security and chain of command by a civilian consultant, I said. My voice was steady, stripped of all emotion. It was the voice I used when authorizing a strike. Thorne picked up the papers. He put on his reading glasses and scanned the first email, the one in all caps demanding I lower the drone altitude. Then he flipped to the second, the demand to reschedule the briefing for a golf game. His face darkened. The lines around his mouth deepened into a scowl of pure professional disgust. He wants to move the intel briefing, Thorne read aloud, his voice low and dangerous. Because he booked a tea time at Army-Navy? Yes, sir, I replied. And he is attempting to issue tactical orders to active duty assets via unsecure channels. He's treating Operation Desert Hammer as a social event. Thorne tossed the papers back onto the desk. They slid across the polished wood, stopping just short of the edge. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I warned you he was a politician, Thorne muttered, but I didn't think he was a fool. He looked at me. I can have his contract terminated by end of day, Lily. I can have security escort him out of the building. He'll never step foot in the Pentagon again. It was a tempting offer. I could end it right now. I could make him disappear. But then I thought about the dinner table. I thought about the intern card. I thought about the way he had introduced me to Colonel Davies as a charity case. If Thorne fired him quietly, Robert would just spin the story. He would tell everyone he resigned because the military was too woke or incompetent. He would play the martyr. He would still own the narrative. No, sir, I said. Thorne looked surprised. No? If you fire him now, he learns nothing, I said, my voice cold. He needs to understand that his rank is retired, but mine is active. He needs to understand exactly who is running this operation. Thorne leaned back, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. He crossed his arms. What do you have in mind, Captain? The protocol requires a final pre-deployment readiness briefing, I said. Usually we do it in the conference room. But since Mr. Rhett is so fond of the Virginia Officers Club, Thorne's smile widened. He understood immediately. You want to hold the briefing on his turf, Thorne said. He wants a show, sir. I think we should give him one. Mandatory attendance, full dress uniforms, all unit commanders present, including Colonel Davies. Thorne nodded, a glint of approval in his eyes. Do it. Send the summons. Remind him what a real chain of command looks like, Phoenix. Thank you, sir. I turned and walked back to my office. I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline anymore. I felt the calm, terrifying focus of a predator that has cornered its prey. I sat down at my terminal and pulled up the official memorandum template. I didn't write a polite email. I didn't ask if the time worked for his schedule. I typed memorandum for record, mandatory pre-deployment brief. Location, Virginia Officers Club, main ballroom. Time, 1800 hours, Sunday. Uniform, service dress. Attendance, mandatory for all senior staff and civilian advisors. I added a specific line at the bottom, highlighted in bold. Failure to appear will be considered a breach of contract and dereliction of duty. I added Colonel Davies to the distribution list. I added General Thorne. And then I added Cole. Rhett, Robert Rhett. I hovered my finger over the enter key. This was it. Once I sent this, there was no going back. I was publicly calling his bluff. I was turning his social hour into a military tribunal. I pressed send. I sat back and waited. It took exactly 12 minutes. My personal phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Robert. I picked it up, expecting anger. I expected him to be furious that I had scheduled a mandatory meeting on a Sunday evening. But when I read the message, a dry, humorless laugh escaped my throat. Got the invite, kiddo. Good initiative. The club is a classy touch. Much better than that basement of yours. I'll make sure Davies knows it was my idea. Wear something nice, maybe that pink dress your mom bought you. Don't embarrass me in front of the boys. He didn't read the header. He didn't see mandatory briefing. He just saw the location. He thought I was surrendering. He thought I was finally playing the good little secretary, booking the venue he wanted so he could hold court and tell war stories. He was walking into a firing squad, and he was stopping to fix his tie in the reflection of the gun barrels. I set the phone down. I stared at the black screen, seeing my own reflection. I didn't see the kiddo he was talking to. I saw a woman who had spent 10 years sharpening herself into a weapon, waiting for a war that had finally arrived home. A verse from Sunday school drifted up from the recesses of my memory. My mother used to make me recite it when I was scared of the dark. Now, it took on a completely different meaning. I whispered the words to the empty room, my voice barely a breath. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Robert wanted a table, I would give him one, and I would serve him a dish he would choke on. The trap was set. The bait was taken. All that was left now was to spring it. We all know a Robert, someone who mistakes your silence for weakness and your patience for submission. But they always forget that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. If you are ready to watch the trap snap shut, if you are ready to see arrogance get crushed by competence, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, I am ready. Let's walk into that officers' club together. Sunday evening arrived with a heavy, humid stillness that hung over Virginia like a wet blanket. I stood in front of my open closet, staring at the hanger in the center of the rack. It was the dress my mother had bought me for Christmas. It was pink. Salmon, she had corrected me, made of chiffon with a modest neckline and a skirt that swished when you walked. It was a dress designed for a garden party. It was a dress designed for a woman whose biggest worry was whether the potato salad had too much mayonnaise. It was the dress Robert expected me to wear. Wear something nice, he had texted. Don't embarrass me. To them, nice meant soft. It meant pliable. It meant a woman who blended into the wallpaper while the men talked about important things. My phone rang, shattering the silence of my apartment. I looked at the screen. Mom. I knew exactly why she was calling. It was 16:30. The briefing was at 18. She was checking the prep work. I slid the answer button. Hello, Mom. Lily, honey. Her voice was breathless, nervous. I just wanted to make sure you're getting ready. Your father and I are already on the way to the club. Robert is riding with us. He's in high spirits. I'm getting ready now, I said, my eyes still fixed on the pink dress. Good. Did you steam that salmon dress? You know how easily chiffon wrinkles. And please, Lily, put on a little lipstick. Maybe that coral shade. You looked so pale last time. She lowered her voice as if sharing a conspiracy. Robert says Colonel Davies is bringing a few of his staff officers, single men, Lily, majors. Wouldn't it be nice to meet someone who understands your lifestyle but could take care of you? Take care of me. As if I were a cracked vase that needed glue. As if I hadn't led teams through crises that would make those single majors weep. I'll be ready, Mom, I said, my voice flat. I'll see you there. Just don't look so severe, sweetheart. Smile, for your father's sake. I hung up. I looked at the pink dress one last time. I reached out and touched the fabric. It was soft. It was harmless. If I wore this, I would walk into that club, sit in the back, drink iced tea, and let Robert introduce me as his little niece who needed a receptionist job. I would be safe. I would be loved. I would be erased. I grabbed the hanger. With a sudden, violent motion, I shoved the pink dress to the far end of the rack. The hangers clashed together with a metallic clatter that sounded like a sword being drawn. I reached into the back of the closet, into the section protected by a garment bag. I unzipped it. The smell hit me instantly, a mix of starch, dry cleaning chemicals, and something that smelled like burnt jet fuel and ozone. It was my flight suit, standard issue, sage green Nomex, fire-resistant, functional. There was nothing soft about it. It was designed to keep you alive in a cockpit while pulling 9 Gs. I pulled it out. This wasn't getting dressed. This was a ritual. This was a night strapping on plate mail before riding out to meet the dragon. I stepped into the suit. The heavy fabric scratched against my skin, rough and reassuring. I pulled the zipper up the front. Zip! The sound sharp and final. I checked the mirror. The gig line, the alignment of my zipper and belt, was perfect. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled on my boots. These weren't the delicate heels my mother wanted me to wear. These were combat boots. Heavy. Black. polished to a mirror shine that you could see your own fear in. I laced them up tight, pulling the strings until the leather creaked. Then came the details. The things that separate a costume from a uniform. I picked up my rank insignia, 2 silver bars, Captain. I pinned them to my shoulders. They caught the light from the window, gleaming like cold stars. I picked up my name patch, Yates. Velcroed it to my left chest, and finally, the patch for the right shoulder. It was a circular patch, embroidered with red and gold thread. In the center was a mythical bird rising from flames, its wings spread wide in a scream of defiance. Above it, the call sign, Phoenix. I slapped it onto the Velcro. Ripstick. I looked in the full-length mirror. The pale, hesitant girl who listened to her mother's passive-aggressive advice was gone. The intern was gone. Staring back at me was an officer of the United States Air Force. My hair was pulled back in a tight, severe bun, regulation style. No stray hairs, no softness. My face was scrubbed clean of the coral lipstick. I didn't look nice. I looked dangerous. I walked to my dresser and picked up my sunglasses, classic aviators. I slid them on. I grabbed my car keys and the folder containing the mandatory summons. I walked out of my apartment, my boot heels striking the concrete walkway with a heavy, rhythmic thud. Thud, thud, thud. The drive to the Virginia Officers Club took 40 minutes. I turned off the radio. I didn't want music. I needed the silence. I drove down I-395, merging into the traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2. My stomach was doing somersaults. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was terrified. Let's be clear, I wasn't afraid of combat. I wasn't afraid of Colonel Davies. I was afraid of him. Robert had been the giant in my life since I was a child. He was the loud voice at Thanksgiving that drowned everyone else out. He was the authority figure who told me I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't man enough. Going against him felt like breaking a law of physics. It felt unnatural. As I turned onto the tree-lined driveway of the Officers Club, I saw the massive brick building with its white columns and manicured hedges. It looked like a plantation house. It looked like the headquarters of the Old Boys Club. I parked my sedan between a Mercedes and a Lexus. I turned off the engine. The silence rushed back in, deafening. My hands were shaking, just a little. A tremor in the fingers. I closed my eyes. I thought about the Bible story my grandmother used to read to me, not Psalm 23 this time, but the story of the shepherd boy. David didn't wear Saul's armor. It was too heavy. It didn't fit. He went into battle with what he knew, a sling, and 5 smooth stones. I looked down at my flight suit. This was my sling. The truth in that folder, those were my stones. You are not his niece today, I whispered to the rearview mirror, watching my own lips move. You are not John's daughter. You are not Martha's disappointment. I took a deep breath, holding it for 4 seconds, then exhaling for 4. Tactical breathing. You are Phoenix 1, and you are cleared hot to engage. I opened the car door. The humid Virginia air hit me, but I didn't sweat. The Nomex armor held me tight. I stepped out. I slammed the door shut. I adjusted my sunglasses, locked the car, and began the long walk toward the white columns of the entrance. I didn't look down. I didn't look back. I walked straight toward the giant, and I had my stone ready in my hand. The double doors of the Virginia Officers Club were made of solid mahogany, polished to a deep, reddish shine that reflected the golden light of the chandeliers inside. They were heavy. They were designed to keep the world out and the elite in. I pushed them open. The sound hit me first, a wall of noise. The low, rumbling baritone of men laughing, the sharp clink of crystal glasses touching, the soft murmur of jazz playing somewhere in the background. It smelled of expensive cologne, aged leather, and the savory, rich scent of prime rib. I stepped onto the plush crimson carpet. The room was a sea of black tuxedos, navy blue dress uniforms, and sparkling cocktail dresses. It was a kaleidoscope of wealth and status. And then, there was me. I was a smudge of sage green in a pristine painting. The Nomex fabric of my flight suit absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. My combat boots made a dull, heavy thud on the floor, a stark contrast to the clicking of high heels and the shuffle of dress shoes. Heads turned, conversations faltered. I felt the eyes of the room sliding over me, some confused, some amused, some offended. I didn't make eye contact. I kept my gaze locked on the far side of the ballroom where a large group of men were gathered near the open bar. I saw him. Uncle Robert was holding court. He was standing in the center of a circle of officers, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing expansively with a tumbler of scotch. He was laughing, that loud booming laugh that always signaled he was telling a story where he was the hero. My father stood slightly behind him, nodding enthusiastically at whatever Robert was saying. My mother was there too, wearing her coral dress, looking anxiously at the door. I walked toward them. The crowd seemed to part instinctively, not out of respect, but out of sheer confusion. They didn't know what I was. Was I a pilot who had just ejected? Was I lost? I stopped 3 feet from Robert's circle. And that's when I told the general, Robert was shouting, "If you want the job done right, you send in the heavy hitters." He took a sip of his drink and turned, spotting me. His smile didn't drop. It curdled. His eyes scanned me from my boots to my sunglasses, and his expression shifted from triumph to pure, unadulterated annoyance. "Lily," he said, his voice loud enough to carry over the jazz music. "You made it." He stepped out of the circle, closing the distance between us. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that smelled of scotch and irritation. "What the hell are you wearing? I told you to dress nice. You look like a mechanic." "I came straight from duty," I said, my voice calm. "Duty?" Robert scoffed. "Sitting in a basement isn't duty, kiddo. It's typing." He sighed, shaking his head theatrically. "Well, you're here now. Try to make yourself useful. My glass is empty and Colonel Davies is thirsty. Go grab a pitcher of water and some refills. Maybe the bar staff will think you're working tonight." He turned back to the group, waving me forward like a prop. "Gentlemen, gentlemen," Robert announced, beaming. "I want you to meet my niece, Lillian, the one I was telling you about." The circle of men turned to look at me. Among them was a man I recognized instantly from the dossiers. Colonel James Davies. He was shorter than Robert, with steel gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen things Robert only read about in books. He was wearing his dress blues, his chest heavy with ribbons. "Lillian," Robert continued, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder, weighing me down. "She's a sweet girl, trying to find her way in the Air Force. I'm trying to get her a position in your outer office, Davies. You know, answering phones, filing reports. She needs a steady hand to guide her." Robert chuckled. "She's a bit of a project, but she means well." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Colonel Davies didn't laugh. He didn't smile. His eyes, which had been politely bored a moment ago, suddenly sharpened. He wasn't looking at my face. He wasn't looking at Robert. He was looking at my right shoulder. Time seemed to slow down. I could hear the individual clink of ice melting in Robert's glass. I could hear the intake of breath from my mother standing 10 feet away. Davies' gaze was locked on the red and gold patch velcroed to my flight suit. The phoenix rising from the flames. Phoenix 1. The color drained from Colonel Davies' face. It happened instantly, like someone had pulled a plug. His tan skin turned a pale waxen gray. His eyes widened, the pupils dilating in genuine shock. And then, recognition. He looked from the patch to my face. He looked at the sunglasses. He looked at the name tag. Yates. "Robert," Davies said. His voice wasn't a social murmur anymore. It was a command. "Take your hand off her." Robert blinked, confused. "What?" "Jim, I'm just introducing." "I said, take your hand off the captain." Davies barked. Robert recoiled as if he'd been burned. He stepped back, his mouth hanging open. Colonel James Davies, the man Robert claimed to be mentoring, the man commanding 3,000 ground troops, did something that made the entire ballroom go silent. He straightened his spine. He brought his heels together with a sharp, distinct click that echoed off the hardwood floor. He squared his shoulders, and he saluted. It was a perfect, crisp salute. a salute of absolute respect from a subordinate to a superior in the operational chain. "Captain Yates," Davies said, his voice trembling slightly. I didn't realize." The silence in the room was absolute. The jazz band had stopped playing. The clinking of glasses had ceased. Every eye was fixed on us. Robert looked at Davies, then at me, a desperate, confused laugh bubbling in his throat. "Jim, what are you doing? It's just Lily. She's the intern." Davies didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on mine, his hand still held in a salute. "This is Phoenix 1, Davies whispered, the name carrying a weight that crushed the air out of the room. "This is the mission controller for Desert Hammer." I slowly raised my hand and returned the salute. Crisp, sharp, final. "Colonel Davies," I said. My voice was low, but in the silence, it carried like a gunshot. "Drop your hand." He dropped his hand instantly to his side, standing at attention. I took off my sunglasses, folding them slowly. I looked at Robert. He was pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at my father, who was staring at me as if I had just grown wings. I turned my back on Robert. I faced Colonel Davies. "Colonel," I said, my tone professional and cold. "I received a disturbing email regarding the tactical briefing for tomorrow. I was under the impression that the timeline had been altered to accommodate a golf game." Davies flinched. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Ma'am, I was told by the civilian consultant that you requested the change, that it was an administrative necessity." "I see," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "Let me be clear, Colonel. My assets fly at Zoro 600. Your men step off at OR 6:30. There is no golf game. There is no brunch. There is war. Are your men ready to receive my cover, or do I need to reroute air support to a unit that takes this seriously?" "We are ready, ma'am," Davies shouted, his military training taking over. "My men are prepped. We are waiting on your green light. We move when you say we move." "Good," I said. I turned back to Robert. He was shrinking. Physically, he seemed to be getting smaller. The arrogance, the bluster, the old boy swagger. It had all evaporated, leaving behind a small, frightened old man holding a glass of warm scotch. "Robert," I said. I didn't call him uncle. I didn't call him colonel. Just Robert. "I believe you have my pitcher of water to fetch?" He stared at me. His face turned a deep, blotchy red. He looked around the circle for support, but the other men, the other officers, were looking at him with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. In the military, stolen valor is a sin. But claiming authority over the operator who protects your life, that is unforgivable. He didn't speak. He couldn't. "I didn't think so," I said. I looked at Davies one last time. "I'll see you at 0600 on the secure channel, Colonel. Don't be late." "Yes, ma'am." I turned on my heel. My combat boots pivoted on the expensive carpet. I walked away. Behind me, I heard the sound of a glass slipping from numb fingers and shattering on the floor. But I didn't look back. The phoenix had risen, and the ashes were already cooling. The sound of the glass shattering against the hardwood floor seemed to echo for an eternity. It was a sharp, violent punctuation mark that ended the sentence of Robert's social reign. For a moment, nobody moved. The whiskey soaked into the expensive Persian rug, a spreading dark stain that mirrored the sudden, ugly blemish on Robert's reputation. Robert looked down at the broken glass, then up at Colonel Davies, then around at the circle of men who had been hanging on his every word just 5 minutes ago. His face was a mask of desperate, frantic denial. He let out a laugh, a wet, breathless sound that grated against the absolute silence of the ballroom. "Jim," Robert stammered, spreading his hands in a gesture of forced casualness. "Come on, look at your face. You're taking this too seriously. I was having a little fun with the girl. You know how family is. Just a little ribbing to toughen her up." He looked around the circle, his eyes darting from face to face, begging for an ally. Begging for someone, anyone, to smile and validate him. "Right, gentlemen. It's just a joke. Lily knows I'm joking." "Tell him, Lily." He turned to me, his eyes pleading. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in them. Not physical fear, but the terrified realization of a narcissist who senses the spotlight shifting away. I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. I just stood there, my flight suit stark and imposing against the backdrop of tuxedos, watching him unravel. Colonel Davies took a step forward. He didn't shout. He didn't lose his temper. His voice was quiet, calm, and cut through the air like a razor blade. A joke, Davies repeated, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. You think the chain of command is a joke, Robert? No, obviously not, but... You didn't introduce her as my commanding officer. Davies continued, his voice rising just enough to carry to the onlookers gathering nearby. You didn't introduce her as a captain in the United States Air Force. You introduced her as an intern. Davies pointed a finger at Robert's chest. It wasn't a physical touch, but Robert flinched as if he'd been struck. You stood there, Davies said, drinking your scotch, and you knowingly humiliated a superior officer in front of her subordinates. In the active corps, we call that conduct unbecoming. We call that disrespecting the uniform. And frankly, Robert, it turns my stomach. The words hung in the air. Conduct unbecoming. In the civilian world, insults are just words. In the military culture that permeated this club, that phrase was a death sentence. It meant you lacked honor. It meant you were no longer one of us. I watched the reaction ripple through the room. The officers standing near Robert, men he played golf with, men he drank with, men he bragged to, began to move. They didn't make a scene. They didn't yell. They simply stepped away. A major checked his watch and turned his back. A lieutenant colonel took his wife's elbow and guided her toward the other side of the room. A group of contractors who had been eager to shake Robert's hand a moment ago suddenly found the architecture of the ceiling fascinating. It was a social freezing out, cold, brutal, efficient. Robert stood alone in the center of the circle, the invisible walls closing in on him. He looked at my father. John, Robert said, his voice cracking, tell them I helped her. My father, John Yates, the man who had spent 60 years hiding in his brother's shadow, looked at Robert. Then he looked at me. He looked at the phoenix patch on my shoulder. He looked at the way Colonel Davies, a man he feared and respected, was standing at attention for his daughter. For the first time in my life, my father didn't rush to fix it. He didn't apologize for me. He looked down at his shoes, took a sip of his wine, and turned away. Robert was abandoned. He looked back at me. Lily. This was the moment I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times since I was 16. I could yell at him. I could list every insult, every birthday he missed, every time he made me feel small. I could scream about the intern card. I could demand an apology. But as I looked at him, sweating, red-faced, smelling of stale liquor and desperation, I realized something. He wasn't a monster. He was just a sad, small man who had to stand on others to feel tall. And screaming at him would only drag me down to his level. A phoenix doesn't fight a worm. It just flies. I didn't say a word. I looked him in the eye for one long, heavy second. I let him see the pity in my gaze. I let him see that his opinion no longer held any currency in my world. Then I turned my head to Colonel Davies. We have a lot of work to do, Colonel, I said. Get your rest. Yes, ma'am, Davies replied. I turned around. I began to walk toward the double doors. The room was still crowded. There were over 200 people in the ballroom. Usually navigating a crowd like that requires weaving, dodging, and saying, "Excuse me," a dozen times. But not tonight. As I took my first step, the crowd parted. It started with the officers near the bar. They saw me coming and stepped back, creating a wide lane. Then the civilians followed suit, sensing the shift in gravity. It was like the Red Sea parting for Moses. On my left, I passed a table of young lieutenants. They stopped drinking and stood up as I passed. On my right, a general's wife nodded her head in a silent gesture of respect. They weren't looking at the mechanic anymore. They were looking at the mission controller. They were looking at the woman who held the line. I walked down that aisle of silence, my boots striking the floor with a steady, rhythmic cadence. Thud, thud, thud. I didn't look back at Robert. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was standing alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by broken glass and the shattered remnants of his ego, while the world he thought he owned turned its back on him. I reached the heavy mahogany doors. I pushed them open, and the cool night air of Virginia rushed in to meet me. It smelled of rain and pine needles, clean and fresh. I stepped out onto the portico. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, sealing the noise, the judgment, and the toxicity inside. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen of freedom. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The knot in my stomach was gone. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots. I looked up at the night sky. Somewhere up there, thousands of miles away, my birds were flying. And in 6 hours, I would be guiding them. I wasn't an intern. I wasn't a niece. I was Phoenix 1. And for the first time in 32 years, I didn't just have a title. I had peace. 1 year later, the sunlight hitting my desk wasn't the artificial, buzzing fluorescent light of the basement anymore. It was real, unfiltered sunshine, streaming through a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of the Potomac River and the white needle of the Washington Monument piercing the blue sky. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, taking a sip of coffee. It was a dark roast, brewed fresh in the break room down the hall. A break room that didn't smell like ozone and fear. I reached up and touched the collar of my service dress uniform. The silver bars of a captain were gone. In their place sat the gold oak leaves of a major. Major Lillian Yates. It still felt surreal to say it out loud. In the military, making field grade is the crossover point. You aren't just an operator anymore, you are a leader. You shape policy. You shape the future. The past year had been a whirlwind. After the success of Operation Desert Hammer and the quiet, brutal fallout at the Officers Club, my career hadn't just moved forward, it had engaged afterburners. General Thorne had recommended me for the Advanced Strategy course. Colonel Davies had written a performance review that practically walked on water. But the biggest change wasn't the rank on my shoulders, it was the silence in my head. For 33 years, my internal monologue had been a constant loop of doubt, fueled by the voices of my parents and my uncle. You're not enough. You're too hard. You're an intern. You're a disappointment. Now, the silence was peaceful. It was the silence of a house that had finally been cleaned of all its ghosts. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk, vibrating against the coaster. I glanced at it. New message, Robert Rhett. I didn't flinch. My heart rate didn't spike. My stomach didn't twist into knots. I just put down my coffee cup and picked up the phone, swiping the screen to unlock it. Robert hadn't texted me in 6 months. The last I heard, the defense contractor had quietly declined to renew his consulting agreement. Restructuring, they called it. In DC, that's polite code for, you are radioactive. The rumor mill, which moves faster than any drone, confirmed that he had been slowly excised from the social circuit. The tea times at Army-Navy were harder to get. The dinner invitations dried up. When you lose your honor in this town, you don't get shouted at. You just get erased. I opened the message. Hey, kiddo. Saw the announcement in the Air Force Times. Major. Wow, that's a big deal. The family's getting together for a BBQ this Sunday. Your mom said you've been busy, but you should come. It's been too long. We should bury the hatchet. Family is family, right? Uncle Bob. I stared at the words. A year ago, this text would have sent me into a spiral. I would have analyzed every word. Did he mean it? Is he sorry? Should I go just to keep the peace? But today I read it with the clinical detachment of an intelligence officer analyzing a piece of low-level propaganda. I dissected the subtext. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He didn't acknowledge the humiliation at the club. He didn't apologize for the emails, the disrespect, or the years of belittling me. Instead, he used the old hooks. Kiddo, a subtle attempt to re-establish dominance, to remind me that I was still a child in his eyes. Family is family. The ultimate trump card of the abuser, the demand for unconditional loyalty in exchange for conditional love. He wasn't reaching out because he missed me. He was reaching out because I was a major now. I was a rising star. And Robert was a man drowning in obscurity, looking for a life raft to cling to. He wanted to stand next to me at a BBQ so he could tell his dwindling circle of friends, "See? I taught her everything she knows." He wanted to steal my valor one last time. I looked at the cursor blinking in the reply box. I could type a furious response. I could tell him exactly where he could shove his BBQ. I could tell him that I knew he was fired, that he was a laughingstock. But then I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hate, it was pity. I felt a profound, deep sadness for him. He was a man who had spent 63 years building a monument to himself, only to realize it was made of papier-mâché. He had chased rank and status his entire life, but he had no one who actually respected him. He had no team. He had no found family. He just had an empty calendar and a phone that didn't ring. He was small. And he was getting smaller every day in the rearview mirror of my life. Fighting him wasn't necessary anymore. You don't fight a ghost. You just walk through it. I didn't type a reply. I didn't block him either. Blocking implies that he still has the power to annoy me. Instead, I placed my thumb on the message and swiped left. A gray box appeared with the word archive. I tapped it. The message disappeared from my inbox, filed away into the digital ether, out of sight, out of mind, stored in the deep freeze of history where it belonged. I put the phone face down on the desk. "Major Yates?" I looked up. Sarah, now Captain Sarah Miller, was standing in my doorway. She was holding a tablet and grinning. "The team is heading to the mess hall. Mike says if you don't come, he's going to tell everyone about the time you tried to karaoke Bohemian Rhapsody." I laughed. It was a real, full laugh that came from my belly. "He wouldn't dare," I said, standing up and grabbing my cover hat. "Try him," Sarah challenged. "He's feeling brave today." I walked around the desk, the heels of my polished shoes clicking on the floor. I looked at Sarah, at her bright eyes and genuine smile. I thought about General Thorne, who had sent me a bottle of good scotch, real scotch, when I pinned on Major. This was it. This was the table that had been prepared for me. Not the one Robert wanted to set, but the one I had built myself, plank by plank, victory by victory. "Let's go," I said. "I'm starving." I walked out of the office, leaving the phone on the desk. I didn't look back at the view of the monument. I didn't look back at the archived message. I stepped into the hallway with my team, my family. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, strong and golden. And as I looked down the long corridor toward the future, I realized the most important truth of all. The sky is infinite. And it has absolutely no room for the people who try to hold you down. Thank you for walking this path with me. I shared my story not just to expose Robert, but to remind you that your value isn't defined by someone else's inability to see it. If you are still in your own basement right now, keep working. Your moment is coming. If this story gave you hope, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more voices that need to be heard. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to cut ties with a family member to save your own peace? Tell me your story in the comments. I'll be reading them. Stay strong.